Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I hesitate to ask the question, but all right. Hopefully you're all still okay and hanging in there. It is Monday, March 23rd, 2020. I don't know, we can't all count the days of the quarantine together in sync because we all probably went inside at slightly different times, but I don't know. Without counting day number XYZ of whatever we're on, can we really truly be united in this country? I don't know, but we're united in our, I don't know what, shall we say? Has it been long enough to say it's suffering? Certainly for some people who have people who are ill or who are worried about what could happen if they become ill, then certainly there's suffering. And of course there are those we've lost, and those numbers are mounting, despite what the guy who purports to be president of the United States has been saying. Remember when we only had 15 cases and soon it was going to be 0? Everybody's getting better. They're all getting better. Well, those were the days. I did happen to see this morning that, I don't know whether he's awake and about yet or not, but I did happen to see that one of the latest items in his Twitter feed was his complaint about the Chinese government being liars about so many things. This is often the case, and it's often the case about a lot of governments. But whose comment was he retweeting? I can't even remember. But yeah, the big complaint was, I guess I'll scroll back to it, that the Chinese government had lied, of course, about the number of people who had been killed in Tiananmen Square. So why would anybody believe them about COVID-19? He was retweeting Andy McCarthy, who I don't have any idea who that is, and I only took a screenshot of his comment, so I'll probably never find out. I could go check it out. Andrew C. McCarthy. He's a checkmark kind of a guy. Maybe you know who he is. I'm sure he's a right-wing something from somewhere. But yeah, that was his big complaint. Chinese communist regime still claims only a couple hundred people died in Tiananmen Square massacre. Why would anyone take COVID-19 figures it puts out at face value? This, of course, was retweeted at some point in the recent past by Donald J. Trump, who had himself claimed that the United States had only 15 coronavirus cases and it would soon have 0. And then, at some later date, weeks afterwards, while we're sitting in the tens of thousands, now complains about the Chinese government and their numbers. And it's not without justification to complain about their numbers, but it's with considerably less justification if you are currently lying about our numbers and had made an effort to adopt as federal public policy to continue to lie about those numbers so that he would look better in his prospects for re-election, which now seem, I hope, to be falling apart day by day, hour by hour, really. We could fill an entire show tracing back the horrors that were documented in my own Twitter stream, just watching the president speak. Apparently, he's still under the impression that his speaking each day helps things. I don't know where he gets that from. I guess that's just, I always thought that the last image in his head was what he kept with him, but I guess it's just the last positive image in his head, or the image that he wants in his head is the snapshot he takes with him and walks on. And there was that day where he gave the briefing, what was it? I think Friday the 13th, and gave that briefing and managed his time such that he didn't actually say anything that he hadn't had written for him until after the markets closed. And so then he took a snapshot of the market chart for the day, autographed it, and sent it to Lou Dobbs, bragging on how his speech to the nation had helped the markets. Of course, the market futures plummeted afterwards, and then we had a massacre of a week following that. But just to top it all off, just speaking as we frequently are about asymptomatic carriers, and we have some new ones to name. But Trump personally autographed this page for Lou Dobbs and sent it to Lou Dobbs. And I just want to tell you, you know what happened to the market, but do you know what happened to Lou Dobbs? Because Lou Dobbs is now in isolation, his staff having contracted the coronavirus, and they no doubt were the ones handling that paper for him. I don't know whether it's just coincidence, but I can tell you that not only that, but you will recall that President Bolsonaro of Brazil insisted that he had tested negative after visiting Mar-a-Lago, and 2 of his top aides came away testing positive for coronavirus. There are, or at the beginning of the weekend, there were 23 now of his top aides and cabinet members positively diagnosed with COVID-19. There was some video that emerged over the weekend of them having a cabinet meeting, all in masks, and Bolsonaro interrupting the meeting to cough uncontrollably and turn away from the group. He now says he might get a second test. So just weird coincidence that all these people keep visiting Mar-a-Lago and Trump and coming away ill with COVID-19. And we learned all we needed to know about the nature of asymptomatic carriers this weekend, too. Greg Dworkin, who's a real doctor, is here, and he'll tell you all about it. Good morning, Greg.
Yeah,
See,
I suppose. Bolsonaro and Trump and some of the others, particularly some of our governors, like in Oklahoma and West Virginia, are really, really, really exhibiting bad behavior. Donald Trump as well. And there was a fascinating interview from Science magazine of Tony Fauci, which just popped out.
I'm seeing less of him.
Yesterday evening. I'm going to keep pushing. Fauci tries to make the White House listen to the facts of the pandemic. And I have to go through this just because it kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen.
Okay.
First question everybody has is, how are you? And he said, Fauci, well, I'm sort of exhausted. Other than that, I'm good. I mean, I'm not, to my knowledge, coronavirus infected. And to my knowledge, I haven't been fired.
Yes.
So the next question, well, how are you managing not to get fired? Well, it's interesting because to Trump's credit, even though we disagree on some things, he listens. He has his own style. He goes his own way. But on substantive issues, he does listen to what I say. And John Cohen, who's a very good questioner, should be actually one of the people at the White House press conferences on the response rather than the political reporters who both sides everything. You've been in press conferences where things are happening that you disagree with. Is that fair to say? Well, I don't disagree on the substance. It's expressed in a way which I wouldn't express because it leads to misunderstanding about what the facts are. Well, you stood nearby while Trump was in the Rose Garden shaking hands. You're a doctor. You must have had reaction like, sir, please don't do that. Yes, I say that to the task force. I say it to the staff. We shouldn't be doing that. We should physically be separating, to his credit. Pence is really pushing for physical separation of the task force during meetings. He keeps people out of the room. So with regard to the task force, the vice president is really a bear in making sure we don't crowd 30 people into the Situation Room, which is always crowded. So he's adhering to that. The situation on stage is a bit more problematic. I keep saying, is there any way we can get a virtual press conference? And thus far, no. That goes to your point of what the heck they're doing. And I'll get to that in a minute. But when you're dealing with the White House, sometimes you have to say things 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then it happens. So I'm going to keep pushing.
Okay.
Well, you're saying nobody should gather with more than 10 people on stage, and there's certainly more than 10 journalists in the audience. I know. I'm trying my best. I can't do the impossible. Well, what about the travel restrictions? Trump keeps saying that the travel ban for China, which began 2 February, has a big impact on slowing the spread of virus, and he wishes China would have told us 3 to 4 months earlier. China did not immediately reveal the discovery of a new coronavirus, but by January, Chinese researchers made the sequence of the virus public. It just doesn't comport with facts, says the questioner. And Fauci says, I know, what do you want me to do? I mean, seriously, John, let's get real. What do you want me to do? Most everybody thinks you're doing a remarkable job, but you're standing there as the representative of truth and facts, but things are being said that aren't true and aren't factual. Well, I told the appropriate people it doesn't comport because 2 or 3 months earlier would have been September. The next time they sit down with him and talk about what he's going to say, they will say, by the way, Mr. President, be careful about this and don't say that. But I can't jump in front of the microphone and push him down. Okay, he said it. Let's try and get it corrected next time.
Yes, Weebles only
wobble.
Well,
you've not said China virus. Ever.
Yes.
And you never will you?
Right.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty straightforward response.
Yes.
And then talks about things that aren't happening on a national scale. And I heard a guy, if you're doing too much, you're probably doing the right amount. And Fauci said, yeah, that's me.
Oh.
Actually, it was Mike Levitt who said it.
Oh, well,
And it was me who said it to Levitt. So, there you go.
Oh, all right. I'll buy that.
What happens before each press conference? What do you do as a group? Well, we're in the task force. We sit down, we go over the issues, and then we get up there and try to answer questions. Well, at Friday's press conference, you put your hand over your face when Trump referred to the Deep State Department. Have you been criticized for what you did? No comment.
He hasn't. I have not seen him criticized for it. That's true.
But right now, we have a travel ban on visitors from China when there were a few cases in China. What's the logic? Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at 2 text messages, one from a governor and one from the White House. I got to get off.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the interview. I think it's extremely revealing. The fact of the matter is we know what to do. And the reason that I think I wanted to preface what we talk about next with that is to go over some guiding principles. Don't forget Rand Paul now has coronavirus, but of course went out and played in the Senate gym and went and talked to people, even though he knew he was testing. He just went out and met everybody, and now he's positive.
Yes.
Oh dear.
I'm surprised you said guiding principles and then thought of
Well, here's the guiding principles. Okay. Democrats are asking,
right.
how can we help people? Because it might get us elected.
Right.
Which is a concern.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
And Republicans ask how we can consolidate power because it might keep us elected.
And what can we steal?
And Trump asks, how can I make money off of this? Because that's the only thing that matters. And Rand Paul asks, how can I screw everybody? Because it's fun. So those are the guiding principles.
That's true. I mean, I did say storybook ending for a libertarian to be an asymptomatic super spreader. Perfect. Exact. I mean, all the externalities on everybody else. This is awesome. Can't wait to swim in my free government pool. Yes, he had a particularly bad publicity weekend, let's say.
Well, let's just say he did everything wrong. But, the practical short-term aspect of that, he is sequestered. Mike Lee, Mitt Romney are sequestered. And because of that, Mitch McConnell has a few less Republican votes to play with.
Yeah.
And so when the bill that the Republicans are trying to push, the slush fund bill for $500 billion of Mnuchin to hand out to whatever corporations that cooperate with the Trump reelection campaign, that's what this bill is. When that went up for a procedural vote in the Senate yesterday, failed.
Yeah.
47-47. Procedural votes, the vice president doesn't break the tie?
I don't know, but that was an interesting question because the vice president's supposed to be very busy right now with the coronavirus.
Well, anyway, it failed, and so Jake Sherman probably had the best take on all of this, which I want to go over because I think I've been following Politico Playbook more closely than usual because you really have to get a sense of what's going on here, and I think they do a nice job of covering it. So. Right. Final particulars of the bill were being worked out by Mnuchin and Schumer into the wee hours of the morning in the Capitol. That's Mnuchin, a former Democrat, negotiating with the Senate Democratic leader late into the night and early into this morning. And then he lays out what happened. It's so odd, and the consequence is so dire, it's difficult to draw broad-based conclusions, but a few things stand out. Mnuchin told reporters last week the bill would be done today, artificial deadlines and all. McConnell brushed aside requests last week to hold a four-corner negotiation between himself, Schumer, Pelosi, and McCarthy. The other McCarthy, Andrew McCarthy, by the way, writes for National Review Online.
Okay.
Instead, he held bipartisan talks with senators for a few days, but the deal ultimately needed Pelosi's sign-off. So Pelosi flew back to D.C., unhappy, went down, and McConnell then blamed Pelosi for staging a late-game intervention, although it was only late because she wasn't invited to the table.
Yes, well, you know how that goes.
Well, it goes badly because McConnell's losing on this. McConnell and other R's seem to make a series of calculations here. They bet that since they allowed Pelosi's Phase 2 bill to pass without negotiation, the Democrats should give Republicans the same courtesy. They bet that the crisis would be so urgent and Democrats' desire to leave so overwhelming that they wouldn't cause problems. That was also not right.
Yeah,
and as Casey Hunt just noted, Schumer and Mnuchin are scheduled to meet at 9 a.m. in the Capitol. The stakes are much higher. Senate Republicans have indicated they'll hold another cloture vote today. They wanted to wait just until the market opened at 9:30 and then hold a vote, hoping that the crashing market would pressure Democrats the way it happened in reverse during the TARP negotiations.
Yeah.
That didn't work. And so now the vote isn't going to be till noon. And that gives Schumer and Mnuchin time to negotiate what the bill will actually contain while McConnell gets frozen out. So that's the background behind all of this. And the idea that somehow or other Democrats will be pressured to do, nobody's going to remember any of this after the bill passes. That's going to be the least lasting part of all of this, even though for some reason McConnell thinks it's the most important thing in the world. And that's because given the opportunity to write a bill, he did it in such a way that I'm surprised he didn't cancel the elections and also cancel voting rights for all Democrats. I mean, basically that's what they do when they have an opportunity.
Well, yeah, they did come up with something that was nearly as bad. I mean, the hallmark of the bill as it stood, as I understand it, was a $500 billion fund, which ended up
slush
fund is the way it's been termed properly. So, which basically could be expended at the personal direction of Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary or Trump as president, and with no reporting requirements about who was getting the money or why or how much of it.
Right, like Trump Tower or Trump Hotels or Trump anything, and he could spend that money on himself and nobody would know. It's ridiculous, and that can't possibly stand. Benjamin Applebaum tweeted yesterday, I'm generally interested to hear the rationale for giving federal money to companies and then letting them fire all their workers, because there was no protection for that in the bill either.
Right.
I assume it has something to do with economic efficiency. So the stock market's going to crash tomorrow, and it's important to understand the problem isn't the failure of this GOP bill. The problem is the GOP failed to propose a bill that protects American workers from economic catastrophe. Now, the market's going to do well this morning. The futures are up because the Fed just offered to buy back bonds for like unlimited amounts or something along those lines. Don't quote me. I'm not a financial guy. But they did intervene in some way, and that's why the markets are up, not because they're hopeful that somehow or other this bill would pass. All last night, the market futures were crashing until the Fed did that.
Okay. Well, we'll see what that means. I have no idea, actually. But, yeah, I mean, it's a bad time to hand over the keys to Fort Knox.
Okay.
Of course,
so you're right. And yet all of that is just the setup.
Oh.
And the setup is for the real problem here.
Yes.
Okay, so Trump last night tweets in capital letters, "We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. At the end of the 15-day period, we will make decisions as to which way we want to go."
Oh, yes.
What does that mean? It means that he's got people in the White House who are much more worried about the economic situation than people dying, partly because they can't grasp what's going on, and partly because they don't care. And it is reasonable, to be fair. James Pedakokis tweeted this: "I don't know what the right amount of quarantine time is, but a liquidation of the U.S. economy also has health consequences, both long and short. We can't pretend there are no trade-offs." And that's correct. Yeah, everything has trade-offs, like the health bill, for example. Medicare for all has trade-offs. Everything has trade-offs. I get that. But what you need in order to loosen the strings on the economy is a cooperative and competent response to the pandemic. That means you need point-of-care testing. Point-of-care testing means you can test in the doctor's office or right where you are rather than send it to Washington, D.C. from Iowa and then wait a week to get the results back. Point-of-care testing, which the FDA just emergency approved, is available in 45 minutes with some tests. And so you have to be able to screen people and say yes, no, and then, okay, you're negative, you can go to work, that kind of thing. But we don't have that yet. It's coming, maybe in a week or 2 or 3. And at that point, if you have really efficient testing, then you can start, loosening up certain things. All restaurant workers get screened before they go, and so deliveries can still get done, and so on and so forth. But you need a competent response to do that. And the last thing in the world we have right now from the White House is a competent response. So the point is, Tony Fauci arguing the medical side of it, and Kudlow and Mnuchin arguing the economic side of it, are going to clash big time in a week after that 15-day period is over. And it's unclear who's going to win. But I would point out, just as you're trying to figure out what does this mean for the election in November, what does it mean for the argument they're going to have next week? By next week, people are going to start to die in big numbers in the United States. And so that's absolutely positively going to influence how that argument goes.
Yeah, well, the 15-day thing, it's made up. When did they make it? Is that
He made it up
based
last
on
night.
well,
He just
everyone
got
should
too much pressure
quarantine
from
for 2
people
weeks?
like chambers of commerce. And the odd thing is that even the holdout governors like Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, whose chamber of commerce wanted to not do anything, are now saying, okay, maybe we have to do the shelter in place thing in a rational, limited way. So she's going to make some announcements today at 11. Ohio has under Mike DeWine, who's a Republican. The governors are really upset with the White House, and they're the ones pushing all of this. So I just wanted to set up that entire large argument because that's really what's going on here. Trump is being pulled and pushed by different aspects of this crisis. It's both an economic crisis and a public health crisis. And although he has been slow to recognize the public health crisis, he's been quick to recognize the economic crisis. And that's why the economics folks always seem to have a slight leg up over the public health people. But the public health people have to be the ones in charge, because if you don't fix the public health problem, then the economy doesn't get better. And again, it's something that we're going to see play out in a big way. And he can't dance around that and bluff. So I just wanted to set up the whole thing about the Fauci interview and, how he's viewing his place there. He's not going anywhere. He needs to have this fight. He could resign in protest if he loses, but I don't think he's going to lose. And the reason I don't think he's going to lose is, were it not for what's going to happen, he would be in jeopardy, because the economics folks always win these fights, but not when people are dying and dropping like flies. I mean, what if the Mar-a-Lago crew all get sick, which is what's going to happen?
Yes. Well, perhaps another week or two will help them to understand.
It'll be Bolsonaro, just like you described. Then what?
The economy is the vector here. I mean, it's our running about and having economic exchanges with hundreds of people a day. The interconnectedness of our economy, despite going online in large part, that's delivering this thing everywhere. So they don't know what to do with a virus that's delivered by economic interaction.
So with that important argument in mind, the economy versus public health, Brendan Nyhan tweets from a New York Times story, White House aides not confident the president can maintain focus on a global pandemic that'll kill hundreds of thousands or even millions of Americans. A grim reminder of where we are as a country. Quoting the New York Times piece, it is not clear to them whether he'll be able to maintain his focus on the crisis for months, especially as the economic situation worsens. Yes. Over the weekend, some Trump advisors weren't ready to accept the likelihood of jobless claims climbing into the millions by next month, which they will. And today is the 23rd, so, Jobs Friday is going to be a disaster. And to the point where he was trying to get states not to report on their own individual jobless claims, which, of course, is not happening. They are reporting. And so a lot of this is going on. I have I think I sent you a BuzzFeed graph about the jobless claims. And the jobless claims filed in 17 states is already 693,639. And according to the graph, seems to just top the 2008 recession jobless claims. Oh. And the difference is, instead of going up slowly, it went up in like 2 days.
Well, yes, that is a steep slope.
It's steep. It's completely vertical.
Yeah. Is that the right number for it? 1, essentially?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like trying to climb El Capitan. It's like straight up.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Okay.
And it's not done. That's only 17 states.
And it looks to be higher than the peak of that.
I mean, according to Obama, we have 54. So, there's a lot more states to come in and weigh in.
Right. We could be getting, who knows how many states snuck in while
there
we
really
were all
are.
in
That's
hiding.
right. That's what Trump said. Who knows how many states we really have? I just found out we actually have more than 17. Nobody could have known that.
Yes, only the red ones he counts.
So,
yes.
I think it's a very important, large discussion overview, 50,000 feet picture that people have to keep in mind. Economy is crashing, and Trump can't stop that because it's being driven by virus. Public health people are saying hospitals are going to be overwhelmed because that's being driven by virus. So if he doesn't address the virus, all the BS in the world and trying to, con people into thinking things are just fine are going to fail. And so maybe after the break, we'll deal with a little bit on what the political consequences of that. But Aaron Blake points out, Jonathan Swan first What's next? At the end of the 15-day shutdown period, there'll likely be a serious clash between the public health experts versus the president and economic and political aides who are anxious to restart the economy. And Aaron Blake retweeted with the comment, I think we're beginning to see why Fauci's exasperation is starting to boil over. I mean, the fact that Fauci gave that interview at all, he's not stupid. He knows what the implications of those are. So he wanted to let the public know he gets it, but, this is what he thinks he has to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see how long that can last. I will note for the record that Bill had an idea about how we could perhaps let the scientists do the work and the president could be distracted with another big truck, park one on the White House lawn and let him sit in the cab and honk the horn and see if that just keeps him occupied for long enough to let the scientists do the work. I am curious to find out in the end of all this, is this another one of those situations? Is Stephen Miller still of influence in all this? I know he's using the crisis to crack down further on immigration. I'm just curious whether he's helping to drive general policy, or is that still Jared? I haven't seen Jared.
No, I think Miller's probably working with Bill Barr to try to get extraordinary powers to the Department of Justice so he can close down court cases. I think that was probably them working together, which the Congress, to their credit, said that's not happening. Yeah, Mike Lee said something like, over my dead body will I give you those kinds of powers.
Yeah, right. But
well, it might happen because he's been exposed to Rand Paul, so we'll see what happens.
And that might be how it happens, Mike, so watch out. Take your vitamins. The courts the courts are in a bad situation. So I've been hearing not only on the side of suits against the government and suits over immigration things, but just your regular the civil court system shutting down, and another big hit to the economy. A lot of people who are waiting to or who are suing or dealing with insurance companies. Insurance companies know the courts in many states are shut down for weeks, and the insurers are just making pennies on the dollar settlement offers and telling people you have to wait 6 months or take what I'm given. Bad news.
Right.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. We're ready to roll with our second segment, just going over with Greg. For everyone who was wondering, I did, in fact, have that outpatient surgery. I think it's affected my voice a little bit, too. Got a nice tube down the throat. That was fun for the first day or so. But my throat is mostly better, but I think the voice is a little soft. Okay.
Yeah. They remembered to take the tube out before you left, right?
I had to, signal to them. But they got it.
In Portland, Oregon, I just wanted to, cover this story because I think it's important. Portland Strip Club, forced to shut down, is now sending strippers out to deliver food.
That's great. Dressed?
Reed Wilson retweets this. Something about Boober Eats. Portland finds a way. So I think it's important to recognize the ingenuity of people, the people who are, using their sewing machines to make masks because there aren't enough. By the way, just so you know, there's nothing wrong with making masks. Maybe we'll have the whole mask discussion.
Your own. You know what? We should.
But they don't work as well if you use cloth as, let's say, a simple surgical mask. N95s are famous because it, cuts 95% of the particulate size out of your respiratory system. And surgical masks do about 80%. And if you make your masks out of vacuum cleaner bags, then 80%. But if you make them out of cloth, maybe 50%. Now, 50% is better than nothing.
Right.
but it's not totally protective.
Yeah, there's been it's a big thing. People making masks. It's been real nice and interesting to see who's stepping up to make them. Some they're making for
who can
hospitals.
or who can't, or who just winds up in the hospital because they put the sewing machine needle right through their thumb because they had no idea what they were doing.
That does happen.
But there are people who are extraordinarily competent at this and make beautiful masks. Yeah. They do help a little bit. The thing about masks, again, early on, CDC said no mask for the public.
Yes.
And that's because they didn't know that there's a lot of asymptomatic spread. Now that we know that there's asymptomatic spread, the reason to wear a mask isn't to protect you. It's not what it does. It's to protect everybody else from you.
Yes.
And if you are asymptomatic and don't even know you're infected, wearing a mask could help everybody else. So there's a rationale for it, and that's why people are doing this. Or people are doing it because they don't know that. But either way, people are doing this. And the whole idea of saying, no, don't ever do this has been challenged. I think we covered that on a previous show, Zeynep Terfecki's article about it, and Scott Gottlieb talking about how that was wrong. It's part and parcel of what has to be considered a fairly botched response from the CDC about anticipating questions, anticipating the pandemic, anticipating how bad things would be, anticipating testing problems. Robert Redfield really should resign. He's awful. There's nothing he's done at CDC that is defensible at this point. So you also notice you haven't seen Ann Schuchat and Nancy Messonnier and the professionals there who do know something. They're not permitted to talk. It's outrageous, and CDC's been completely sidelined during these briefings so that Trump can speak. Why is he speaking in this way? Why does he insist on being there every day? Why does he start with they give him the things to read, and then he goes off and he does extemporaneous ad-libbing, as Tony Fauci famously hits his face with his palm because he can't help it?
Yeah.
It's because of two things. First of all, Trump's an idiot. We know that. But and he's using these as his surrogate rallies because he's not allowed to have rallies anymore. Mm-hmm. That's one reason. And the other is, and this has been reported, he's furious at Andrew Cuomo because Cuomo is giving terrific briefings every day, compassionate, factual. This is where we are. This is what we're doing. This is what's going to happen next. I understand that this is impacting everybody. It impacts my family. Let me tell you that. I get it. We have to do it anyway. They're great, and they're getting rave reviews. And Trump is furious because his aren't. So he actually tried at the beginning of yesterday's press conference. I try not to watch them, but I just had to watch to at least see how he presents himself. And it was this maudlin, rambling treacle that he had about I care. I know I care because it says so in the paper here, and I have to read it. I mean, it was that kind of stuff, and it was just awful. And you're listening to this and say, this is like, every day I say this press conference is the worst yet, and then he comes out and he does another one, and it's even worse.
Yeah, he's a bad reader. I mean, he
terrible.
just is. And it's like night and day when he's reading script and then commenting on it, and you can tell when he goes off script because he says words, but words that don't mean anything. And he'll, I think he gave some comments about the hospital ships yesterday, and he named the two ships, and then he decided to speak extemporaneously. And again, it's perfect, kid not ready for book report moment. These two ships, they're so big, they're so beautiful. I've seen them. Well, I saw one, and they have rooms in them, and they use them for medicine. Like what? Oh my God.
Yeah, and they're not ready to sail. And when they get here, they're not really for the coronavirus patients. They're for the non-coronavirus patients. But he doesn't make that clear at all, of course.
So they did bring somebody else up to say that. The FEMA guy, I think, took care of that. Disastrous, as usual. And
meanwhile, according to reports, FEMA and FDA are sitting on stockpiles of masks and other things that are not getting out to people. And one reason is they haven't been, quote, inspected yet, end quote.
Oh, all right. Well, is that necessary?
Well, there are not enough inspectors, because they're all non-essential people, so they don't go to work.
Some masks, I guess, probably bear inspecting. Like, I understand that there's expiration dates on certain of the N95 masks.
Yeah, so what?
I don't know.
That just means you can't sell them, not that they can't work.
Okay, so good. All right. So, look, this one's expired. It's inspected. Go. I guess.
Right. I remember back in 2009 when we were talking about Tamiflu, the medication used against influenza, and that was an influenza pandemic. And Tamiflu expires in 5 years. And governments, particularly states, had bought a lot of the stuff to stockpile for their citizens, even though they couldn't figure out how to get it to citizens. You can't give them to pharmacies because it's already bought, that kind of thing. But they had these stockpiles, and they didn't want to buy stockpiles every 5 years because they cost millions and millions of dollars, and states didn't have that money for something that might not happen.
Right.
So the federal government said, okay, we'll just extend the expiration date.
Oh, well, you know how it is in the Senate. You can do anything.
Yeah, but then you go, okay, well, if you're doing that, why was it that in the first place? And a lot of the regulations that get dropped, why are they there in the first place? What do you have to have inspectors look at these N95 masks for? If this is like emergency use, one of those EULA things.
Right. I guess versus Trump's advice to wash them out because we have such good liquids and use them again.
You do that with cloth ones. But you don't necessarily want to do that with surgical ones.
Yeah,
Again, the tip that I had been circulating around our hospital, which is now official policy, is you take a mask and you drop it in a paper bag. If you have 7, that's great. And you do one a day, 7 masks, 7 days, and recirculate. So on Monday, you wear the Monday mask, put it in the Monday bag. And on Tuesday, you wear the Tuesday mask, put it in the Tuesday bag, go through Sunday, then go back to Monday. And by then, the virus will die, having been sitting in the bag, which lets it breathe so moisture doesn't accumulate. And, it's not perfect, but it's a sterilization method where if you don't have enough stuff, that's what you're going to wind up doing.
Okay.
The other things is the hospitals are trying to repurpose their radiation oncology units. They have these particle beams and dilithium crystals and all that other stuff that they have in hospitals. And if you aim and zap the mask, maybe you can kill the virus.
Huh.
Does that work? I don't know, but they're trying.
Seems like you small area kind of thing usually. I don't know, but okay. But yeah, that's a good point. The virus lives. It's a problem. It lives on surfaces, but it doesn't live that long. So a week should probably do it. You're right. Okay. Well, I'm not making any masks.
Storm, that kind of thing. So when you don't have enough equipment, you start getting creative.
Yes. All right. Well, there's a lot of creative mask making going on, as you mentioned. I'll probably talk a little bit. I'll cover that for you, the creative aspects of it later on, so you can.
Well, that's good. So we were
science.
talking about this to my hospital several weeks ago.
Yes.
It's now official policy because I saw they blasted it out to an email. This is what staff can do. But it's funny because we were whispering it because it's not CDC policy. They didn't say you could do this. And now CDC is starting to come out with, okay, in the situation where you don't have enough masks, here's what you're allowed to do.
No liquids.
In certain circumstances, you don't need to wear one. In other circumstances, you can repurpose them or reuse them or, do what you need to do. This is what happens when reality starts pushing back on policy. And that's why I say CDC still has to go back and let the public know in no uncertain terms what they know and what they don't know. And it's okay to say we don't know so that the public knows themselves what are they supposed to be doing about masks. Certainly, you don't want to take masks away from the medical personnel and first-line people who need to use them. Right? You can't get tested if there's not enough personal protective equipment for the people doing the testing because they stick a Q-tip in your nose and they could aerosolize the virus, so they have to have a mask when they do that. And if they don't have a mask, they're not going to stick the Q-tip in your nose, so you can't get tested. There's a very practical, selfish reason why you should give your mask to the hospital. But if there's a rationale behind doing, let's say, cloth masks or vacuum cleaner masks, then CDC needs to get on it and explain to the public what's going on. Yes. And again, been there, done that. When they have to change policy, when they've already decided stubbornly that this is their policy, it takes them months to go through committees and start to do that and then get it up on their websites. That's why 11 years ago, 15 years ago, we were doing wikis and blogs because we knew CDC was too damn slow.
Yeah, well.
But nonetheless, they have to do that because now it's a giant public issue and nobody really knows what the right answer is. And CDC just stubbornly claiming that everything we told you in the beginning is what is still true. We know that they screwed up everything else, and nobody's going to believe them.
Yes, well, it's quite a situation. So vacuum cleaner bag. Bill would like to know, he's got now a bagless vacuum cleaner. And can he
just put the vacuum on your head?
Yeah, can you just put that whole receptacle on your head and
close it up? The funniest thing, absolute hysterical thing, was some British guy had a video. I don't know if you saw this one. His little novelty store was selling women's thongs with a British flag.
Yes.
If you position the thong exactly right over your face, You can make a mask out of it.
Okay.
And so he was on YouTube explaining. He only has a few left, but this is how you do it.
Oh, it's down to just a few.
It's down to a science, just a few. You got to buy them now before they go. But it was actually very, very funny. Almost as funny as the Italian mayors.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah.
That video has been going around of the Italian mayors in Italian, but with subtitles explaining to the constituents why it's really important that they stay at home.
Right.
And they were, shall we say, frank in their language.
Right. Franco.
Right? You think you're going to have a graduation party? How about I send the police over to your house with flamethrowers?
Yeah, that was a new one. I like that one. Lots of people picking out which Italian mayor are you. It's a new test you can take on Facebook.
Absolutely. So yes. I get all of that. So that's important.
Good.
And then before I go, I do want to mention something that's, reminder that this affects other countries as well. So because of the coronavirus, Israel, which had an election, you may recall, and you probably don't know who won because they don't know who won or who lost. But it appears that Netanyahu's party, Likud, lost, and the blue and white party of Benny Gantz won narrowly.
All right.
And so imagine the Knesset is our House of Representatives. Imagine we had an election, a close one, and parties changed hands. So now Nancy Pelosi is about to be Speaker. And Kevin McCarthy was Speaker before that. I don't even remember anymore.
No, he wasn't, but he was.
Who was the Speaker who spoke? So it was Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan,
right?
that jerk that no one remembers.
Okay, so Paul Ryan is Speaker, but we had an election. The Democrats won, and Ryan's about to be replaced by McCarthy.
Yes, right.
That has to happen by vote.
Yes.
Right? Process question here.
For among the Republicans.
So Pelosi gets elected Speaker of the House by a vote of the House of Representatives. So that vote has to take place.
Right. Yes, that too.
And so right before that vote, Paul Ryan announces, okay, because of coronavirus, we're not having the vote. I will remain Speaker.
Problematic.
House of Representatives is closed.
Yes.
That's in effect what happened in Israel with the Knesset. And so the speaker there is Edelstein is his name.
I do not know.
And he is the Knesset speaker, is essentially Likud, and said no vote. And the courts just said no. There will be a vote. It'll be Wednesday.
All right.
And today's Monday. So on Wednesday, when that happens, then the Knesset will change hands from Likud to blue and white to give you an idea of who wins and who loses.
All right.
Right? So that's how it is playing out. We don't know until the Wednesday vote whether they'll actually do that. But let's just say it was the Israeli equivalent of a democracy grab.
Okay. That happens quite frequently.
And then what? Why is it important? Well, imagine then that Edelstein is now out and a new speaker is in, and all of a sudden there are new laws about how, if you're indicted, you can't serve as prime minister get passed. I'm just trying to give you an idea of why it's important. Until Pelosi got elected speaker, there was no chance of impeachment, that kind of thing. Right. So there are some profound questions for the nation that are at stake, and which party is running the Congress and has the gavel and can do the procedural votes and decide what comes to the floor. It's kind of important.
It is for a number of reasons, and there's even a coronavirus connection. Of course, Israel will be dealing with the coronavirus just like everyone else. And now that it's in, as I had forgotten to spare a thought for Gaza, overcrowded Gaza now having discovered its first infections. And how do you deal with that? With restricted movement already, but how do you do social distancing in Gaza?
Or prison.
Yeah.
But I repeat myself.
Right.
So these are issues. Harvey Weinstein now has coronavirus, and he caught it in prison. And so, all of these things are going to come to the fore. So again, the idea that Trump can BS his way through this is crazy. But I bring up the Israeli example because people have said, well, what if Trump uses this as an excuse to cancel elections? That can't possibly happen in America. Well,
No,
it can, and it just almost happened in Israel, but the court stepped in.
Well, we've been considering it a little bit. We spent a little time on it on Friday, I think.
Oh, good for you.
That,
I mean, no, I mean, it's important that you cover it, but I'm saying America as a whole hasn't grasped how bad this virus is, and America as a whole hasn't grasped the idea that the elections in November are at risk, and that's why all these discussions, including stimulus bills that say, by the way, you want to throw something in a stimulus bill? It isn't just a secret slush fund that you can direct money to Trump properties. Why don't you do one that guarantees November elections and maybe even talks about vote by mail? Well, that's a ridiculous. No, it's not. Actually, it's kind of important. And if this is the vehicle that gets it passed, throw it in.
Yes. All right. Yeah, well, we got
if you say nothing can happen, it's stupid. What do you care? Just vote yes.
Okay.
We think it's important, then you might try to cancel the election, even though you deny it. So vote yes because it's nothing. That's what you just said.
Yeah, right. It's not happening, so it shouldn't be a problem for you. Right. True. That rarely works, but we encourage them to give it a try anyway. I think it just intubated me again. Pardon me. Okay.
Well, just don't start coughing and have a fever. Okay, please don't do that.
Yeah, right. One thing at a time, please.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's the story there.
All right.
I was watching Chris Arnaud's feed, my friend that Armando doesn't like, talk about some ideas that people were having, because Cuomo has said that he's going to repurpose the Javits Center, this enormous Chicago-size convention hall, into a emergency hospital. And remember, pandemics are a shortage of staff, stuff, and space. That takes care of the space, just like the hospital ships do.
Right.
The hospitals have stuff and staff, but the Javits Center doesn't. So how you staff it and where you get your stuff, unclear. Nonetheless, those are the kind of steps that they're taking, and that's all good. So somebody, just trying to make some humor and get people through, however, whatever gets you through the night kind of thing.
We'll try it.
Said, well, why don't we just repurpose the hookah bars and turn the hookahs into ventilators?
I was wondering about those. We have one nearby. I thought that's a terrible thing to do during a pandemic.
So Chris Arnaud saw that and made some comment about, you really think that the Sheepshead Bay, bars are going to wind up being ICUs? Now, I'm from New York, so I get this. Immediately somebody stepped in and said, you got something against Sheepshead Bay?
Right.
Step outside.
All right. Yeah, Bayside.
And, that was just a wonderful New York conversation. Hey, I love New York. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to rate the 5 boroughs. Staten Island is last. And I'm looking at this and chuckling and saying, this is just so New York. This is how people react when you're under stress.
Well, there's plenty of that to go around.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
So you should see all of that.
All right.
So, in summary,
one
last thing here, and let's end with politics. After all, this is a politics show. Trump's coronavirus spin won't help him in November. If the president wants to be reelected, he'll need to end the COVID-19 crisis, not duck responsibility for it. That's Jonathan Bernstein writing in Bloomberg this morning.
Can't do that.
I need to talk a little about the politics of the coronavirus response. I know. Many people don't want to hear about it and just want everyone to do what's right. Sorry, it's still important. Nothing gets passed without politics, folks. So, you don't like process, too bad. You got to pay attention to process because otherwise it doesn't happen. You don't like politics, too bad. You got to pay attention to politics or it doesn't happen. The politics of what Trump is doing is trying to shift blame, not necessarily on Democrats. That's just a side issue. He tries to shift blame to immigrants. That's where Stephen Miller comes in, writing the China virus stuff for Trump. That's where Stephen Miller comes in. But Jonathan Bernstein writes, sorry, it's still important. What we need to know about its effects on the 2020 election is that substance will be far more important than spin. And this is what Trump and McConnell really need to know. Nobody in November is going to care what Joe Biden said in March. Remember, there's all these calls for, why doesn't Biden come out and do a fireside chat every day? He's invisible. Bernie's doing it. Nobody cares.
But then he's not
Nobody cares. That is not the issue. Nobody's going to remember. It's nice that Biden has a few things to say. It's nice that Bernie has a few things to say. Important people saying important things. That's great. What really needs to happen is the bill needs to pass based on politics, and that's what people are going to remember. Now, he adds in parentheses. So I guess that makes it parenthetical, right? I should explain.
Yes.
McConnell insisted on holding a cloture vote Sunday despite not having an agreement on the bill. Naturally, the vote failed. You could address that. You're an expert on that. It's possible McConnell just counted votes poorly. He might have thought the vote would reveal a split Democratic caucus and bring Democrats to fold. If so, he was badly mistaken since he got a party line vote that demonstrated the Republicans need to give more to get the bill through both chambers. Republicans should be the most worried because recessions typically doom incumbent presidents. For example, see Alan Abramowitz's forecast item from last week when he was looking at what a mere 5% downturn in second quarter GDP would do to an incumbent according to his model. And it looks like we're in a much bigger slump. As Abramowitz correctly notes, it's possible that a recession clearly caused by a natural disaster might not be as harmful to Trump, but it certainly might be. And at the same time, nobody knows what kinds of direct public opinion effects the coronavirus and measures taken to stop it could have on Trump. There isn't any good historical comparison. And what this means is that Trump and the Republicans have an absolute political incentive to do whatever's possible to prevent the worst damage to both public health and to the economy, going back to our discussion about which one of those is going to win when they start fighting. It also means that spin, and especially attempts to deflect blame onto Democrats, aren't likely to work out. If that were possible, then the models wouldn't work at all. After all, every president from Washington to Obama tries to shift the responsibility for bad things to others, but the evidence tells us that voters don't buy it. In other words, if Trump wants to get reelected and McConnell wants to remain Senate majority leader, they need to focus all their energies on alleviating the crisis, not attempting to shift blame for it. And that's why McConnell blaming Pelosi for the fact that his cloture vote failed yesterday is stupid. It's not going to work, and nobody's paying attention to him.
Yes. And again, because it was a cloture vote, that answers your earlier question about whether Pence makes a difference. Not one vote. One vote won't make a difference in a cloture. We need 60 for that, remember.
Okay, so he could pass a rule that says you don't need 60, but it was a 60-vote threshold at the time they took the vote, which is why it didn't matter. He needed Democrats to win, in other words, and he knew that from before the vote.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why he didn't understand that it was going to fail.
I mean, the word
Even I knew that, and I'm no expert. He is. He's supposed to be the whiz.
I think you touched on it. I mean, he may really have thought that as a matter of reciprocation for passing the House bill, that they would, out of courtesy, get out of the way of this bill. But it was so
well. Normally that would happen by him talking to Schumer about it, right?
Yes.
And Schumer would have said, no, it's not happening, and then McConnell would have known. I mean, this isn't rocket science.
No, I think he was just trying to. He knew it wasn't going to work, and
he was
I
trying
think
to
he was
jam
looking to say, yeah, look, Democrats are the ones standing in the way of response. It didn't work.
It didn't work. It failed. So now what? So now he gets cut out. The end result of his maneuvering is that he gets cut out of the negotiations. How smart is that?
I don't know. Now that I think about it, I wouldn't want to be in those negotiations either. But he supposedly has that. That's part of his makeup. He wants to be there. So then in that case, not smart.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, from here, that's the way the picture looks. Now, again, Jake Sherman, I think, is covering this fairly well. I just think McConnell majorly screwed up because, again, just like Trump, whose main interest is how does it help me and can I make money?
Yes.
And his son-in-law Jared, who's running things, how can I make money? Completely misread what was needed. The McConnell side of it is how can I stay in power? And I think that he misread the situation as well. He tried to write a bill that his Republicans liked and thought he could jam the Democrats into doing this, and especially jam the House. The House is going to put out their own bill by Anthony Maxine today, and it's a great bill and has a lot more stuff in it that's good.
Yes, like help for you, people.
By the way, Anthony Maxine is a term of affection.
Yes.
That's Maxine Waters.
He's not
and she's
anti-Maxine. Right. It's anti, yes. A-U-N-T-I-E.
Auntie,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Right.
Auntie, as they say in Connecticut, Anti-Maxine.
Yeah.
She's great, and she's going to have her own bill coming out of her committee, I think, that might even get voted on today by the House. And it's a very different focus, and it focuses more on people and what they need and unemployment and all that sort of stuff. McConnell just played this entirely wrong. And, for somebody who's supposed to be really smart about this, it's very reminiscent of how the healthcare bill failed.
True. Speaking again of Connecticut, did you say they say auntie in Connecticut in some parts?
My wife tells me he was born here.
Okay. What's going on in Darien? I understand that they rejected the drive-through testing because it would
they set it up
property
somewhere else.
values or something.
The neighbors
Yeah.
complained, which is very, very Connecticut.
Yeah, that does sound pretty Connecticut.
So they
These
did
guys
it
complain
just in
with,
a slightly different location where the
could
neighbors
they,
didn't complain.
yeah, could they add tannerite? Would that help with the neighbors? Because that's a
Uh,
big thing in Connecticut.
I think if Martha Stewart had come and
Exploding
decorated
drive-through.
the entrance, I think
Oh.
everything would have been fine.
That's a thought. She could do the tents. Maybe it's
Yeah.
the color.
Right.
Well, I'll ask her.
I mean, there's some pictures floating around of people's apartments and how everything has been crocheted, even the lampshades, because like you have all this time on your hands.
Right. Yeah. I'm plenty
Anyway,
of
so
things.
that got you through the first hour.
You
The
sure
rest
did.
is up to you.
Okay.
Don't cough and don't laugh. It's going to hurt for a
Yeah.
couple of weeks.
Well, then not coronavirus. It's my
Don't
operation.
lift anything.
Right.
Leave the
yeah.
heavy lifting for other people. That's just my advice.
I am going to have to get a lighter laptop. That's going to be my excuse, maybe.
Absolutely. So take care and be well, and I will talk to you on Wednesday, and we'll see if we're still around.
All right. Very good. So far, so good. I'm going to make some masks out of stuff. I understand furnace filters is a hot item, too. We'll try that.
Use those thongs. That's what they're for.
I guess so. I must have a stockpile of them somewhere.
Well, if not, you can go out at least for essential things.
Yeah, where were they having the strippers delivering the food? Maybe they have some.
Yeah, I don't know.
I forget where you said that was. I'm going to that city as soon
Yeah.
as I can
Okay.
walk there. Okay, very good. Thanks, Greg. So
Portland.
There was
Portland,
something in the
Oregon.
news.
There it is.
Oh, the other Portland. Okay.
Yeah.
Too bad. Other coast.
Too bad.
Very good.
All right.
Thanks, Greg.
Take care, and talk to you Wednesday.
Yeah, all right. We'll do it from behind this glass. Very good. I appreciate it. And, we'll catch up on all of the latest stories, some serious, some less so. Sort through the Twitter feed from the weekend where some of the most unbelievable things happened. I can't believe this guy we have who says he's president. It's so weird. It's like he doesn't know anything about what's going on. I can't figure it out. Anyway, lots to catch up on. Absolutely serious about those furnace filters, by the way, and they actually have some of those, like if you get those 3M furnace filters that you slide in, some of those are rated for really small microparticulate type things. They might actually qualify as not quite entirely N95 masks. I wouldn't guarantee them at that level, but apparently enclose those inside sleeves of cloth masks like people are making, they'd be pretty effective. Welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Wow, okay, so an awful lot to try and catch up on, and there's no telling which direction things may take because I'm going to open up the Twitter stream. I'm going to open up Pocket. I must have put 50 things in Pocket. All of them could occupy an hour or more in each of the stories, but we'll try and make it through with a broader sampling. I did happen to see something else interesting come by on Twitter during Greg's segment. How about this one? A newspaper clipping screenshot grabbed by Gotta Laugh. Many of you, of course, following Laughy on Twitter, and you would have seen this one if you were watching this morning. High Court dismisses challenge to Wolf shutdown order. That would have been the High Court of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, dismissing a lawsuit challenging Governor Wolf's shutdown order. Who filed it? This is really amazing. Pennsylvania Supreme Court dismissed a lawsuit filed by a gun shop, leave it to a gun shop, to challenge the shutdown order. Now, why did they challenge the shutdown order? Of course, your mind might immediately have gone to, well, you're violating the Second Amendment, our Second Amendment rights to acquire guns with which to shoot the virus. Of course, the thinking of the gun enthusiast is, oh, I'll be shooting people who have come to take my toilet paper while I'm dealing with the virus. But whatever, you can evaluate the necessity of that. But aren't you violating our Second Amendment rights by shutting down gun shops? But an even more specific challenge than that, which is what makes it so interesting, the suit challenged the governor's authority to shutter businesses which are determined to be, quote, non-life sustaining. You understand? So they're saying, in other words, everybody is closed except for those who sustain life in the case of emergency. That would be for most of us. The grocery store, the pharmacies, apparently the banks, so that you can get a hold of money to buy things at the grocery stores and the pharmacies, and, first responders, hospitals, etc. But you know how gun enthusiasts are about their guns. To them, we've been documenting how many lives guns take, but to them, the mantra is always that guns save lives. So if you believe guns save lives, then how could a gun shop, which sells life-saving machines, which are really, of course, handheld instant death machines, quite the opposite, how is that non-life sustaining? So we're stuck there. So for the moment, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania says, to hell with that, your idea that guns save lives. Legally speaking, STF you and get out of here. So that's nice. So we'll see whether that's a sustainable position over the long term. But in an emergency, I think it's probably a little easier for people to understand. And there you have it. So, news from Pennsylvania. Political news that was rounded up over this bailout bill, or the last round, phase 3, I guess, of the coronavirus response bill. The political situation as captured here by Adam Gentelson's tweet. Adam Gentelson, former deputy chief of staff for Harry Reid, pointing out here that McConnell's own conference is asking him to stand down and move towards Senate Democrats. So an excellent opportunity for Democrats to use that leverage and get a far, far better bill. How does he come to that conclusion? He includes the tweet of Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, and of course a Republican, saying, "It's time for the Senate to get this done. People are hurting, and I want to be clear. Any relief for big corporations," imagine this language out of Republicans, "any relief for big corporations must limit executive compensation, ban stock buybacks, and require companies to pay back loans with interest, or I'm not voting for it." Look how socialist all of these Republicans have gone. And it's okay, we don't need to needle them. We can accept their votes and be glad of it. But yeah, it's a good point here. Essentially, you're talking about some hardcore right-wingers saying, McConnell, you don't understand what you're doing. And as Adam says, hard to know what he was thinking in calling that vote last night when his own conference is going socialist, as it were. Another fact to point out with, let's see, Rand Paul now in quarantine. Who else has had to go into quarantine? We saw Mitt Romney reportedly in quarantine as well, having come in contact with somebody who was known to have been exposed to coronavirus. And he's got something else to watch out for. His wife, Anne, as you know, has got MS, so I imagine she's pretty compromised immune-wise, and he's not going to... Apparently, he's been in quarantine and in isolation apart, separate from her out of, proper concern, not even an abundance of caution, the proper caution for an MS patient. And so, that's got to be pretty trying to not only be isolated but separated from your family that way. And there were a few more, and at yesterday's press conference, they named them as they were posing a question to Trump about the necessity of, well, shouldn't we be thinking about some way of implementing remote voting really for everybody when it comes to the election, but at least for Congress, which is going to have to be, have to remain able to act during this crisis, but will increasingly be fragmented with members in isolation, in quarantine. And Trump didn't know exactly, and I don't know exactly, so I don't blame him too much for missing this angle on the news. Who is it that's been quarantined? And they named them. Really interesting moment, though, was when they mentioned that Romney was in quarantine, and also Rick Scott of Florida being in quarantine. I don't know exactly what his situation is, but it was Trump's impression, it sounded like, that he thought Rick Scott was coming back out of his quarantine, was on his way out, that he had been in self-imposed quarantine for almost long enough, almost the 2 weeks that was originally recommended. I don't know whether that's still the recommendation. I don't know whether it's wise to come out of quarantine ever for any reason whatsoever, but he seemed sure that he was coming on his way out. And then the list went on, and then it hit him a few seconds later that they had said Mitt Romney. And then he stops everything and speaks over the reporter and says, Mitt Romney's in quarantine? Gee, that's too bad. I mean, almost just like that. And he prompted the reporter to say, do I detect some sarcasm there, and Trump, covered his ass, giving it, oh, no, none at all. But, in a very unconvincing way. I know that the words in a transcript will be written down, no, none at all. And then I can read that back in court and, argue that I was very serious in saying that. But if you heard him say it, you wouldn't be fooled by that. And as a matter of fact, you probably can hear him say it because I did capture it. I was so stunned by it that the president of the United States, allegedly, would say such a thing that I videotaped it. Of course, not that, I mean, myself, because I'm not president of the United States, I have been less than a shining beacon in the way I treat, for instance, Rand Paul in getting the news that he was in isolation. I felt the same way. So I have some sympathy, I guess, for Trump in doing that. But then again, I'm not responsible as president of the United States, and I don't occupy the same position. It was rather stunning to see him make these comments in this way. And I think if I scroll back just a little further, I will find that bit. I sent out a couple of videos. One was that one, and the other was of him just being super stupid on healthcare yesterday, which maybe I can play for you as well. Is this it? Yeah, I think so. It was a pretty short exchange. So let me bring this one up and pause this. Yeah, there we go. And I'll turn up the volume on it. There we go. Here's the exchange.
With the critical stimulus package vote expected.
Romney's in isolation?
Yes.
Gee, that's too bad. Go ahead.
Is that sarcasm there?
No.
Sir?
No, sir.
Do you think with the
Did you catch that? I mean, is that loud enough? Do I need to crank that up? I hope that went out well. But I can boost it for the podcast video. But gee, that's too bad. That was just rather amazing, I thought. There was another exchange, which is a little bit longer, about a minute clip of Trump discussing health care. He is asked about the wisdom, I guess, or the situation of the federal government joining in support of Texas's lawsuit to repeal the entirety of the Affordable Care Act, which he characterizes as, well, that's a suit coming out of Texas, as though he has nothing to do with it, as though his federal government wasn't writing briefs in support of Texas's position here. The DOJ is supporting Texas's position. But he goes on to the way he discusses healthcare, like when he discusses anything extemporaneously, it's just that not ready for your book report style of thing. It's 3 years into his term of office, he's saying, well, what we're trying to do here is we want to get rid of the bad healthcare, and we want to have great healthcare. So we're going to get the bad out and put the great one in, if we can do that, and then we'll have great healthcare. You see, and then that's why I'm trying to do it, because the healthcare has been bad, just bad, and ours is great. And in addition, that he doesn't understand pre-existing conditions. Not only is he misstating his position and his party's position on protection from pre-existing condition exclusions by insurance, he shorthands it, and so he always ends up saying the quote is, the Republican Party is fully backing pre-existing conditions, which you take it at face value means we're pro pre-existing conditions. We want people to have pre-existing conditions that allows their insurance company to exempt them from coverage. He's trying to spit out in shorthand, we're for protecting consumers against being excluded by their insurance providers on the basis of having pre-existing conditions. But that's a lot of words. And you know how he is with words. He's not particularly good at it. So he made a very... I'll give you the video that I captured from that in the roundup rather than play it for you. So yes, then there was Rand Paul testing positive, the first senator to test positive for coronavirus, and he did it in the most spectacular fashion possible. If you didn't catch it at the beginning of the show, if you somehow have missed the story, everything that you shouldn't be doing, he's doing. He knows he's been tested, which means he knows that there's a reasonable chance that he may be a carrier. He still doesn't, I guess he still didn't at that point grasp real reality of asymptomatic carriers being able to pass the virus on. So he was in the gym working out that morning. When he put out the results of the test, he said, his staff said that the senator left the Senate immediately and went into isolation. But within hours, even less, other Republican senators were going on record telling reporters, I saw him this morning, that was yesterday morning, Sunday, in the the Senate gym here on Capitol Hill and eating lunch with us in the dining room, and he's in close quarters, and he was absolutely not doing a goddamn thing to distance himself from anybody, plus using the gym. Now, mind you, all the gyms for regular people's gyms in D.C. are all closed because they're hotbeds of passing on this virus. There's just too many surfaces being contacted by too many people shedding too much virus. But Congress, you know how it is. They make their own rules. They exempt themselves from everything, and they kept their gym open because they're really important people. And now they'll all be sick because Rand Paul went and made them all sick. Now, they made a big point of pointing out that he was swimming in the pool there. I imagine that chlorine, does a pretty good number on the coronavirus, and maybe the pool isn't a terrible vector in the same way some other untreated surfaces might be, but I wouldn't want to be swimming in it. And it's a bad image that he's steeping in the waters there, and other senators like that pool too, and lots of people like their gyms. Once again, privileging themselves above everyone else because presumably they're going to, it's a small number of people. They'll take good care of the place and good care of one another. Not Rand Paul. Externalities are us. Rand Paul gives it to everybody, and quite honestly, at this point, I hope they all get it. Let all the Republicans have it, and let them go into isolation. Because, by the way, one of the other things that's happening along the way is Mitch McConnell is losing his majority, one senator at a time. The situation currently, as it stood last night, was that the Republicans could muster only 48 votes with all of their people in isolation, whereas the Democrats had, at least theoretically at their command, could still muster 47. So it's a 48-47 Senate right now, although Bernie Sanders, I understand, is not in Washington, D.C. I know he's getting a lot of criticism about that. He should have, people saying, he should have been here for the votes yesterday, because it's an important subject. But I guess also it does reflect reality to point out that it was a cloture vote yesterday, and you didn't really need Bernie's physical presence there to be able to block the bill by cloture, because, invoking cloture depends on mustering 60 votes in the affirmative. But, people are correct in saying, well, it would be nice if you were there and participating in the discussions to move the bill along. But then again, you should be distanced from that. And of course, he's running for president still. That too leads to a lot of criticism. And then, so I mean, if we start down this road, then we have to start talking about whether Joe Biden is doing enough and should he be on TV. I don't really know exactly what he's going to do on TV. But people are hoping that he would provide some sort of shadow government activity in the absence of any real activity from the supposedly the actual government. It might be a good opportunity for him to do that. But on the other hand, I would warn against handing the microphone to Joe Biden and saying, tell us all about science, guy, because I'm not certain he's up to that task, and it might just be unfair to ask any politician who isn't, in fact, a scientist to step into that role. But there could certainly be a Team Biden clearinghouse for decent information where actual experts get to speak. The best thing Biden could do is that thing that I guess Trump's staff was hoping he might do, but should have known better than to trust him to do, of basically introducing a panel of experts and then stepping aside and letting them speak and not interrupting them and not taking questions and not trying to be the one who... The president shouldn't be anywhere near... Any president should be nowhere near answering these questions, quite honestly. But anyway, that's kind of where we stand. at the moment, and any more Republicans in isolation, and it certainly looks for all the world like there will have to be more of them given what Rand Paul just did, then, you might have a situation where McConnell can't muster an actual majority on the Senate floor. And, I saw David Neer pose the question this way. What do you think, if you're wondering, what should Schumer do? Schumer should be guided by the principle of what would Mitch McConnell do if the shoe were on the other foot? If Democrats were in the majority, but enough Democrats were sick and in isolation that they couldn't muster a majority on the floor, would McConnell, out of, respect for his counterpart, simply concede that, well, technically we would normally have a Republican majority and we'll just do things as if they did, and we'll withhold votes from among our Democratic caucus such that the Republican majority is maintained, the illusion of their ability to muster a majority. I mean, votes are cast by those senators present and voting. If they can't make it, they can't make it. That's why it's a serious job. You got to show up. So, we'll see whether it progresses to that point. I imagine that there will just be senators that drag themselves onto the floor, sick or not, and they'll just make everybody sick, and then we'll all be doomed. All right, let's see. Other things that we need to catch up on. Let's see. Another Mar-a-Lago vector. Just toss this one in for fun. Why don't we do that? Trump's ambassador to South Africa was at Mar-a-Lago some time ago with that dinner with the Brazilians and the mayor of Miami and everybody else who is suddenly sick with coronavirus. It shouldn't surprise you. The U.S. ambassador to South Africa is known chiefly as a fashion designer and Mar-a-Lago club member. That's how she got the gig. But she's worrying her staff and staff at the State Department because, of course, like most Trumpists, she's refusing to take the exposure to the virus seriously. Let's see, we'll jump right in here to the piece here. Ambassador Lana Marks is who we're talking about. She was at the dinner at which the Brazilian officials who later tested positive were also in attendance. She told her State Department employees, though, she did not consider herself at risk. Why not? Because the dinner was outside, and she believed the virus could not withstand the Florida heat, according to people familiar with the matter. And another one believing in Trump's stupid theory about hot weather kills the virus. No evidence for that, and in fact, plenty of evidence to the contrary. Ambassador Lana Marks made the claim during a town hall meeting for hundreds of staff members at U.S. diplomatic facilities in South Africa on Thursday, which was held following several days of concern among staff members who knew of her exposure. Details of the session were provided to the Washington Post afterward by people familiar with the ambassador's remarks. Employees voiced concerns during the meeting about Marks's failure to self-quarantine or take other protective measures, which I wonder whether now, in light of Rand Paul, she might perhaps change her mind or perhaps pay no attention to that whatsoever. Employees voiced concerns during this meeting about her failure to self-quarantine or take any other protective measures. The people provided descriptions of the meeting and Marks's actions on the condition of anonymity, of course, because they were afraid of getting fired. The State Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment. State Department employees at Thursday's meeting protested that they had been placed at risk, that Marks is not following the guidelines set by the CDC, and that she is incorrect that the virus could not have been transmitted at an outdoor dinner. Marks, a fashion executive, maybe not even a designer herself, but a fashion executive, and Mar-a-Lago member, told staff at the meeting she would go into semi-seclusion, but not cut out all meetings or contact with staff, the people said. She had previously told staff members who raised concerns that the incubation period had passed, and she does not believe she's at risk, because science and fashion, they go hand in hand. During the meeting, Marks said she was not in close contact with an infected person, and the temperature at Mar-a-Lago that night was above 26 degrees Celsius, which is about 79 degrees Fahrenheit, and that the virus would not be transmissible at that temperature. That doesn't sound like science at all. I understand it gets pretty hot in Brazil, where they're all sick now, by the way. The virus, do you need any more information about the virus? No, probably not. She had previously told staff members at the embassy she did not believe that the positive test result for a close member of President Jair Bolsonaro's staff, Press Secretary Fabio Weingarten, Wajngarten, Weingarten, I don't know. Anyway, she didn't believe. How do you like that? She just doesn't believe the positive test result. No, I don't believe the negative result for Bolsonaro, so I guess we're even. Brazil's acting ambassador to the U.S., who sat at Trump's table at the dinner, has also tested positive, and has at least one other person, who was at Mar-a-Lago that night. Bolsonaro said his own test was negative. It's not clear whether Mark's has been tested or will be. At least two other U.S. officials, White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham and Senator Lindsey Graham, opted to self-quarantine after attending the same dinner. So there's another in isolation. Trump said he had been tested for the virus a week ago, and the test was negative. I don't buy that. He is not self-isolated or self-quarantined. And his chief White House doctor said last week that neither Trump nor Vice President Pence need to do so. I understand that Pence and Mrs. Pence have since been tested. They, too, claim that their results are negative. And, we'll see. Okay, so that's where we stand with the ambassador to South Africa. There's a bit more about that. You can read up on that as I provide you with the links. There's many more stories worth combing through. Let's see. What else have I put aside here? There's quite a few. And let's see where to go to next. Let me see. Why did I put this one aside? A tweet from Greg Miller. Yes. This has been pretty interesting, too. Some good backgrounder stories that we might want to share. Greg Miller, the national security correspondent for the Washington Post, tweeting on Friday. Trump fired Joe Maguire as Director of National Intelligence a month ago. Now he, Maguire, and practically every other living ex-DNI or NCTC chief has signed on to this piece warning that Trump is putting the nation in peril. Isn't that strange that the nation should be in peril and that the commander-in-chief has no idea? Shall we read a little bit, by the way, of what they think is the case here? Former intel chiefs, Trump's removal of experts is deeply destructive to our nation's safety. You probably guessed this by now. Signatories on the byline here, Joe Maguire, John Brennan, Michael Leiter, Leiter, do I have the pronunciation right? Matthew G. Olson, Nicholas Rasmussen, Andrew Liepman, 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 Jeffrey O'Connell, Michael Hayden, that one I remember, and James Clapper. I remember those two guys too. They list their credentials in case you didn't know. Some of the names that were not as familiar, acting and deputy directors, I guess Leiter, Olson, Rasmussen, Lippman. O'Connell was a principal deputy, and the other guys acting or actual DNI positions. The United States, they say, and the world faces a historic threat to its health, well-being, and economy. Maybe you've heard of it. The global COVID-19 pandemic challenges all of us, the public, cities, states, and of course, the federal government. But as we collectively fight this deadly disease, the intelligence institutions that help protect us all from current and future threats are also under attack from an insidious enemy, domestic politics. We cannot let the COVID-19 pandemic be a cover for the deeply destructive path being pursued by the Trump administration. The most recent illustration of this unprecedented attack is the continuing dismissal of career intelligence professionals, officers who have ably served both Republican and Democratic administrations, regardless of their personal political stripe. Specifically, the unceremonious removal this week of the leadership of the National Counterterrorism Center, that's the NCTC that we previously mentioned. The NCTC, though not as recognized an entity as its intelligence community counterparts such as the CIA, FBI, and National Security Agency, is one of the crown jewel creations of the United States' post 9/11 reforms. And we don't want to fall into 9/10 thinking again, do we? Created to connect the dots and coordinate U.S. counterterrorism operational planning, the NCTC brings together representatives from across the federal government to maintain critical watch lists, monitor threats in real time, and make sure that the disparate elements of the massive federal bureaucracy respond in a coordinated fashion. Wouldn't that be great? In short, since 9/11, the NCTC has helped to do for counterterrorism what the U.S. government is now trying to piece together against its new viral threat. So, some people who are apt at connecting the dots, what use could we possibly have for them? I don't know. Let's fire them. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. So, not only are we firing all the counterterrorism experts because they might be finding results or information or worries that run counter to preferred Trump administration narratives, but we are also finding that other people useful in this particular situation finding themselves without work. And I don't mean just everybody in the United States. I mean the Peace Corps. This deserves some mention too. Saw this one over the weekend, reported also by the Washington Post. The Peace Corps isn't just bringing home 7,300 volunteers because of the coronavirus. It's firing them. And I don't know what I guess there could have been some legitimacy to the initial concern that maybe Peace Corps volunteers might be in a particularly vulnerable position if they were left overseas in places with less than adequate access to health care in the global spread of the coronavirus. But also, a lot of them were in places where the coronavirus hasn't actually reached the population in great numbers. But eventually, I guess it will reach everywhere. So I suppose there was some justification for reaching out and maybe bringing people back home. But I'm not entirely sure how that calculus comes out because, of course, you are also perhaps bringing people home who may have been exposed to the coronavirus. The coronavirus is everywhere. We don't really know where it is and where it isn't just yet. And bringing them home from some of the places with less than adequate health care and then parking them here in the United States might not be such a great idea. But perhaps even worse than that would be the idea that we ought to bring home people who have volunteered to put themselves in places with less than adequate health care and in real adverse positions with respect to health care and adequate access to clean water in some cases and food supplies. But to take these people who have gone off as volunteers, educated in public health and how, even absent the usual necessary resources to keep large numbers of people healthy, despite the health risks they face, why bring them back and lay them all off and fire them and leave them idling in their houses or perhaps their parents' basements? Is a good question. But Joe Davidson covered this one for the Washington Post. We'll give you a small taste of what's going on for these people up with the lead couple paragraphs in this article. Because of the coronavirus, the Peace Corps is doing more than evacuating its 7,300 volunteers from 61 countries. It's also firing them. In a March 15th open letter to the volunteers, the agency's director, Jody Olson, said, "We are acting now to safeguard your well-being and prevent a situation where volunteers are unable to leave their host countries." But nowhere in the statement posted on the agency's website does it tell the public that all the volunteers are being dismissed. That information is in the agency's frequently asked questions about the evacuations. How do you like that? It's a good place to park it, right? All evacuated volunteers and trainees, regardless of length of service, will be classified as having undergone a completion of service, it says. That leaves volunteers such as Kimberly Ruck, who have sacrificed in service to 2 nations, at home and abroad, upset, dismayed, and angry. Although the volunteers received dismissal notifications separate from the open letter, Director Jody Olson's statement is very misleading to the public as well as the volunteers, Ruck said by email on Friday, her last day as a volunteer, in her post in Windhoek, Namibia, if I'm pronouncing Windhoek correctly, in southwestern Africa. What is really happening is she has ended the service of all volunteers, and there will be no voluntary activity in any of the 61 countries until the coronavirus is over, until countries open borders, until countries issue visas, and until Peace Corps begins accepting applications to join. An agency statement to the Federal Insider said volunteers were dismissed instead of being allowed paid leave, which would have sounded like a better option, because, quote, "it is logistically impossible for the agency to place each of them on administrative hold for an indeterminate period of time." I don't know, we're doing all sorts of things now that we never thought was possible before, but okay. Peace Corps volunteers typically serve for about 2 years. So, all right, you're left to unravel that mystery. There's more in the article, which I provide you. I can't do a whole lot of reading through the entirety of articles today. There's just too many things to get to. Haven't even gotten yet to an important fact that I think will play into the effort by Republicans to, I guess they'll try their best to try and revive some part of this bill that McConnell put together with the horrible inclusion of the $500 billion slush fund that we mentioned earlier. It's just a bad time, I think, for a $500 billion slush fund. Why do I say that? Reminder, these Republicans who are mad about not having this slush fund adopted yesterday and not having Democrats roll over for the creation of this fund, these guys were just like now, hours ago, caught red-handed insider trading on intelligence briefings that they were getting about the coronavirus. They were profiting off of the coronavirus and the information that they were getting in their roles as senators. And rather than warn their constituents or do anything about relieving Americans' stress over the virus, they were trading stocks on this basis. Now, the initial reporting, there was an initial burst of reporting by somebody at the papers looking through disclosure forms from all the senators and seeing if they did any stock trading. And it turns out there's some just like qualitatively worse than others. And it looks like the worst of the stuff was done by the first 2 names out of the box. Richard Burr from North Carolina, the worst Burr since Aaron, as we refer to him here, and it's true, and maybe even worse now. And Kelly Loeffler, the appointed Republican from Georgia, sitting in Johnny Isakson's seat. And I bet Isaacson's glad he's not around for this coronavirus nonsense. But remember, or maybe you never knew, Loeffler apparently came in as the wealthiest senator of the bunch. She's worth $500 million as it is. And, you know, I guess you could excuse her. How could she possibly know about the dangers and the ethical dangers of insider trading? She's only married to the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. How do you like that? So she actually did some of the worst trading there. Burr doesn't hold nearly as much stock as she does, but the first reporting about his trading was pretty disturbing as it is. Now, I have the ProPublica reporting on it in front of me. Robert Fatturecci and Derek Willis. Pardon me, I hope I've got the names correct there. Senator dumped up to $1.7 million of stock after reassuring the public about coronavirus preparedness. So his story is pretty egregious, really. Let's thumb through it, shall we? Soon after he offered public assurances that the government was ready to battle the coronavirus, the powerful chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who, by the way, has spent all of his time on the Intelligence Committee sneaking notes to the White House about what Trump was being investigated for and continued to do so through the impeachment process as well. But the powerful chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, sold off a significant percentage of his stocks, unloading about between $628,000 and $1.72 million worth of his holdings on February 13th in 33 separate transactions. This was well before the crash of the markets, of course, but it was based on inside information he was getting by virtue of government briefings on intelligence about the coronavirus. And I think probably, you could make the argument that a smart person, having seen what had happened in China and what was beginning to happen elsewhere, would anticipate a crash. But it is put in, let's say, starker relief by getting private intelligence briefings about it. As the head of the Intelligence Committee, Burr, a North Carolina Republican, has access to the government's most highly classified information about threats to America's security. His committee was receiving daily coronavirus briefings around this time, according to a Reuters story. I think it was Reuters probably broke this stuff first, if I'm not... Well, I don't know. I sort of feel like maybe the Washington Post had done some of the initial digging too. Maybe they did so in cooperation with ProPublica. I guess I'll stay away from the provenance of the stories if I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, a week after Burr's sales, the stock market began a sharp decline and has lost about 30% since. But those losses, of course, don't affect him because he sold ahead of that crash. On Thursday, Burr came under fire after NPR, there we are, obtained a secret recording from February 27th in which the lawmaker gave a VIP group at an exclusive social club a much more dire preview of the economic impact of the coronavirus than what he had told the public. Now, I will tell you ahead of time that Burr tried to deny this and tried to, as he said, correct the record. Well, I was giving basically the North Carolina State Society is a briefing, which is something senators always do for their state societies. And I wasn't giving them special access or special information. It was open to the public and yada, yada. But as it turns out, it was a very different subsection of the North Carolina State Society. It was a pretty exclusive group of high-dollar donors. And the briefing, by the way, he hasn't answered for this one. Why hold the briefing at the National Republican Club is the next question. He had it at the Capitol Hill Club, which is the National Republican Clubhouse, essentially, just steps away from the Capitol. And although you don't have to be a registered Republican to get into the club, why hold it at the Republican Club at all? Why hold a briefing for the State Society there just because you're a Republican? That's a place where members frequently go to make political phone calls and do their fundraising and stuff. But so I understand why he might use that as a convenient outside of a government building location to hold a briefing. But it just makes it look that much worse. Anyway, Senator Burr filed a financial disclosure form for personal transactions made several weeks before the U.S. and financial markets showed signs of volatility due to the growing coronavirus outbreak, his spokesperson said. As the situation continues to evolve daily, he has been deeply concerned by the steep and sudden toll this pandemic is taking on our economy. Burr is not a particularly wealthy member of the Senate. Roll call estimated his net worth at $1.7 million in 2018, indicating that the February sales significantly shaped his financial fortunes and spared him from some of the pain that many Americans are now facing. In other words, his net worth was about $1.7 million, and he sold about $1.7 million worth of stock. So it sounds like, his entire net worth was wrapped up in this thing that days later dropped by about 40% in value. But not for him, just for you see. He was one of the authors of the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act, which shapes the nation's response to public health threats like the coronavirus. Burr's office did not respond to requests for comment about what sort of briefing materials, if any, on the coronavirus threat Burr may have seen as chair of the Intelligence Committee before his selling spree. According to the NPR report, Burr told attendees at the luncheon held at the Capitol Hill Club, "There's one thing that I can tell you about this. It is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything that we have seen in recent history. It is probably more akin to the 1918 pandemic." This is while Trump's saying it's a hoax. Don't worry about it. 15 people, they're all getting better. Worse, Burr does much the same thing. He warned companies might have to curtail their employees' travel, that schools could close, and that the military might be mobilized to compensate for overwhelmed hospitals. The luncheon was organized by the Tar Heel Circle, a club for businesses and organizations in North Carolina that are charged up to $10,000 for membership and are promised interaction with top leaders and staff from Congress, the administration, and the private sector. Burr's public comments had been considerably less dire. In a February 7th op-ed that he co-authored with another senator, he assured the public that the United States today is better prepared than ever before to face emerging public health threats like the coronavirus. He wrote, "No matter the outbreak or threat, Congress and the federal government have been vigilant in identifying gaps in its readiness efforts and improving its response capabilities. Members of Congress are required by law to disclose their securities transactions." Burr was just one of 3 senators who in 2012, by the way, opposed the bill that explicitly barred lawmakers and their staffs from using non-public information for trades and required regular disclosure of those trades. In opposing the bill, Burr argued at the time that insider trading laws already apply to members of Congress. Good, so arrest him. President Barack Obama signed the bill, known as the Stock Act, that year. Stock transactions of lawmakers are reported in ranges. Burr's February 13th selling spree was his largest stock selling day of at least the past 14 months, according to the ProPublica review of the Senate records. Unlike his typical disclosure reports, which are a mix of sales and purchases, here all the transactions were sales. His biggest sales included companies that are among the most vulnerable to an economic slowdown. He dumped $150,000 worth of shares in Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, a chain based in the U.S. that has lost 2/3 of its value, and he sold up to $100,000 of shares in Extended Stay America, an economy hospitality chain. Shares of that company are now worth less than half what they did at the time Burr sold. The assets come from accounts that are held by Burr, belong to his spouse, or are jointly held. So there you have it. Pretty interesting. Now, of course, as I mentioned, that's not necessarily the worst of it. Kelly Loeffler, also involved in similar activity, but I would say worse. Now, Burr's disclaimer here, Burr's excuse that he tweeted out, he said, in a tabloid-style hit piece today, NPR knowingly and irresponsibly misrepresented a speech I gave last month about the coronavirus threat. Let me set the record straight. The lunch was hosted by the North Carolina State Society. It was publicly advertised and widely attended. NPR knew but did not report that attendees also included many non-members, bipartisan congressional staff, and representatives from the governor's office. But they also reported that it was not, in fact, just a state society event, but a Tar Heel Circle event. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Every state has a state society, he goes on to say. They aren't secretive or high-dollar donor organizations. They're great civic institutions that bring people in D.C. together for events, receptions, and luncheons, and they're open to anyone who wants to get involved. Like most members of Congress, I address our state society every year. That's a good thing. That's what we should be doing. And that part is true. Meeting constituents and talking to them about the work we're doing in D.C. is an important part of the job, especially in times of uncertainty. Unfortunately, NPR's journalistic malpractice has raised concerns that Americans weren't warned about the significant steps we may have to take to stop the coronavirus threat. That's not true. Well, it's true that you didn't do anything for us. Then he goes on to cite, well, on February 26th, the president and public health officials urged schools, hospitals, businesses, and families to begin making plans for potential closures, social distancing, and telework. And no, by the way, it's all a big hoax, etc., etc. Anyway, the NPR's reporter responds to that on Twitter. Tim Mack is the reporter here, and here's what he has to say. Senator Burr responds to the piece from this morning. You can read it here. And he goes on to say, Burr says that this lunch was hosted by the North Carolina State Society, but in fact, the Tar Heel Circle was the host, and they're a much more exclusive part of the North Carolina State Society. North Carolina State Society membership is $25. Tar Heel Circle, he reports, is actually anywhere from $500 to $10,000. Senator Burr here, he says, conflates the Tar Heel Circle with the much broader North Carolina State Society. He lays out the fact sheet about membership and costs and who's in that versus the Tar Heel Circle as well. And it was, of course, the Tar Heel Circle who was at this luncheon. What he says, what I wrote is, despite his longtime interest in biohazard threats, his expertise on the subject, and his role as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Burr did not warn the public of the government actions he thought might become necessary. Senator Burr's argument here is to blur the lines between his personal duty to warn the public and whether others warned the public. The president said something, but I held it in check. Anyway, it's a pretty interesting thing and an interesting response here, too. Burr not looking particularly good in this situation. Like I said, neither is Kelly Loeffler. Loeffler not only dumped millions in stocks pre-crash, but actually went on a buying spree. Long story short on this one, she dumped everything that she thought would be hurt, which is almost everything, or lots of stock in everything that she thought would be hurt, and then went and bought stock in Citrix, makers of some of the more popular telework platforms. Once she found out that businesses would be closed and people would have to work from home, she said, maybe I should buy some, actually make a killing off of all this killing and cash in on the corpses, if you will, and buy Citrix. That stock might go up. So this is the report of the Daily Beast. Lachlan Markay taking the lead on this, along with William Brederman and Sam Brody. Senator Kelly Loeffler dumped millions in stock after coronavirus briefing. And subheader here, she's the second senator who has gotten rid of their holdings right as the stock market went bad. The Senate's newest member sold off 7 figures worth of stock holdings in the days and weeks after a private all-senators meeting on the novel coronavirus that subsequently hammered U.S. equities. Senator Kelly Loeffler, Republican of Georgia, reported the first sale of stock jointly owned by her and her husband on January 24th, the very day that her committee, the Senate Health Committee, hosted a private all-senators briefing from administration officials, including the CDC director and Anthony Fauci, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, on the coronavirus. Appreciate today's briefing from the president's top health officials on the novel coronavirus outbreak, she tweeted about the briefing at the time. That first transaction was a sale of stock in the company Residio Technologies, valued at between $50,000 and $100,000. The company's stock price has fallen by more than half since then, and the Dow Jones average overall has shed approximately 10,000 points, dropping about a third of its value. It was the first of 29 stock transactions that Loeffler and her husband made through mid-February, all but two of which were sales. One of Loeffler's 2 purchases, stock worth between $100,000 and $250,000 in Citrix, a technology company that offers teleworking software, which has seen a small bump in stock prices since Loeffler bought in as a result of the coronavirus-induced market turmoil. Loeffler's office didn't respond to requests for comment, of course, and whether the transactions were prompted or informed by information shared at that briefing. It's illegal for members of Congress to trade on non-public information gleaned through their official duties. Late Thursday night, she did offer a statement, tweeting, "This is a ridiculous and baseless attack. I did not make investment decisions for my portfolio. Investment decisions are made by multiple third-party advisors with or without my or my husband's knowledge or involvement, I'm sure." As confirmed in the periodic transactions report to Senate Ethics, I was informed of these purchases and sales on February 16th, 3 weeks after they were made. I have a hard time believing that. Her husband has no knowledge of it, really? Chairman of the stock exchange. In the weeks after her spate of stock trades, Loeffler sought to downplay the public health and financial threats posed by the coronavirus, because she's Trumpy and wanted to cover her tracks, too. Democrats have dangerously and intentionally misled the American people on coronavirus readiness, she tweeted on February 28th. Here's the truth. Donald Trump and his administration are doing a great job working to keep Americans healthy and safe. Yep. Concerned about coronavirus? She tweeted on March 10th. Remember this, the consumer is strong, the economy is strong, and jobs are growing, which puts us in the best economic position to tackle COVID-19 and keep Americans safe. Loeffler is the second known senator to sell off large stock holdings between that January 24th briefing and the dramatic drop in stock market indices over the last week. I wonder how much trading she was doing before this, by the way. That's what we ought to be looking at. Anyway, yeah, so she and Burr lashing out, insisting that there was nothing abnormal about it, and she didn't even know about this. She had no idea. So you could excuse us, I think, as Democrats, perhaps, for not wanting to buy into a $500 billion slush fund administered by people we don't trust, who actually, I've been thinking, any minute now, Trump and Mnuchin were going to start looting the place. Now they'll have the permission to do so, and it'll be granted to them by people who were just caught with their hands in the cookie jar. And really, honestly, they probably didn't even wash those hands before they stuck them in the cookie jar. It's unbelievable, and really should spell the death of anything that Republicans are trying to do by way of driving any relief bills. No one should trust them, and these two stories are all the evidence you really need. So, what else do you want to know? I don't know. There's no more else that we can fit in, I don't think, before we cut out. Let's see. Anything else that we can quickly chime in with? I don't know. I don't think so. I think we got it all in. Did I mention to you that the news that the weirdo reporter, the new Jeff Gannon, if you will, from One America News, who was in what I guess must have been the Thursday press conference before we took off for Friday, has been identified as having been involved in pushing some weird conspiracy theories before. Media Matters has this one. I don't know. What's the name of this reporter? Is she named near? I'm sure. Chanel Rion, R-I-O-N, the one that was called on by Trump. And she was the one that put forward the theory that some of the people right here in this room, members of the mainstream media, are working with the Chinese Communist Party to undermine America and spread rumors about the coronavirus. And she was the one that prefaced her questions by asking, well, people are accusing you of racism by calling it the China virus. Is calling it Chinese food, is that racist because it is inspired by Chinese cuisine or comes from China? You remember that whole thing? Yeah. Well, as it turns out, she's got another theory. Just thought I'd fill you in on it. Apparently, it was her theory that the novel coronavirus was, in fact, lab created here in the United States. And, in fact, in North Carolina, Richard Burr's own state. How weird would that be? But weirder still than that is her theory that it was Dr. Fauci who was the financial backer of this effort to create the coronavirus in a mysterious lab in North Carolina. Now, that's somebody who got called on in person by name by Donald Trump in a White House briefing about the coronavirus outbreak. And in case you had any illusions about being able to take the White House operations seriously, I guess if that has somehow survived all this time, perhaps that will help take it apart. Okay, that's the story. And take a look at this thing, because the way she presents her story over at One America Network is incredible in terms of where does this theory come from. She says as support, she cites Greg Rubini. Who's that? Well, she described Greg Rubini only as a citizen investigator and monitored source amongst a certain set in the DC intelligence community. Now, it's hard to get too upset about citing a citizen investigator, because some of them have done some great work. That's true. But that does raise an eyebrow. Monitored source among a certain set of the DC intelligence community, that I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. But as it turns out, someone was laughing their head off. They used a video clip. They needed an image of this person, and so what they did was they took something that I guess looked like it might be a serious person to an intelligence community member, and as it turns out, it was one of the actors from 2001: A Space Odyssey sitting at the HAL 2000 computer. 9,000? Did I get the number wrong? Amazing. Unbelievable. These people can get into the White House and get called.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, stay tuned, as always, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. Justice Putnam will bring you his unique spin on all of today's stories. Anything really interesting and outstanding? Sure, of course. Information from all around the world and tidbits from throughout history as well. Always an esoteric selection there.